So, because we only got the one mic, the format will basically just be you shouting your question, and Karen and Khalil will basically repeat the questions, make sure everyone understands it, and then they will provide their answer.
Shout it loud, but don't sound angry, whatever you do.
Yes, that. So, yeah, it should just go pretty smoothly. If anyone has any questions, just shout them out. So.
Screwed back to me, guys. My question is that why is there so even more like a divide and conquer agenda amongst the sexes today compared to other decades before that? Like even more prevalent now than before.
Okay, so why is there more of a divide and conquer attitude, or I guess animosity between the sexes? Yeah, an agenda of stirring up a divide. I think that it's a combination of things. You know, the better things get, the more people complain. I mean, it's one of those ironies in terms of just any kind of, you see this with, say, black students in the US at Ivy League colleges, talking about now microaggressions, right? And wanting all kinds of action to deal with that, right? Because you can't even call it aggression anymore. You can't even call it explicit racism. It's microaggressions now that people are and they're more hostile now in demanding action about those things, those small first world problems, I guess you would call it. Then you know, at sort of the height of the civil rights movement, in terms of the lengths that they were willing to go to then, and the actions that they were prepared to take. So I think that really the better things get for women, or at least for women in the West, right? The angrier feminists become, and the smaller and smaller things that they have to focus on, mansplaining, man-spreading, man-interrupting, all of those portmanteaus of man and their bad behavior. So I think that that's part of it. And I think that, you know, there is a financial interest in maintaining the animosity, maintaining the gender war. Lots of people's paychecks depend on women being oppressed or being seen as oppressed. And lots of people's belief systems depend on that. So when you have, even if you didn't have a financial interest, you have a sort of a worldview, an investment in this worldview that women are oppressed. So you reject any kind of information to the contrary. So I think that that's really what it is. They're stirring up all of this nastiness. When really they should be celebrating. So I think, you know, it's a complex thing, but I think it's one of those things about humans that are that's counterintuitive. So
Is it being propagated by the information age that we have right now? Do you think that's really a really strong part of that too?
Oh, social media doesn't help. It absolutely doesn't. I mean, you can take the smallest little transgression and throw it onto Twitter and just stir up everybody into a tizzy, and then everybody's dogpiling on everybody else, and then you get people at each other's throats, right? And the hostility of and this is one of the things about Twitter that I absolutely hate, and why I don't go there really, is because you cannot make a nuanced point in 140 characters or less. You cannot explain your position in 140 characters or less unless your position is already well understood. Right? So unless you can make your point with a slogan, unless you can make your point with a buzzword, and everybody knows what you mean by that, then you're toast on Twitter. So stay the fuck off of Twitter, please. All of you. Because it's cancer. Yes?
Portrayed in the movie, it's mostly Western civilization, right? You got Canada, the US, the UK, Sweden. Does anywhere in the world have it right?
No. Oh, sorry. Does any? The movie talked primarily about the U.S. But as for places outside of the Western world, does anybody? Is there any place where I guess feminists would have cause to complain about a patriarchy that oppresses women? and privileges men at women's expense and all of those things, no. I don't think that there is any culture in the world where women are more likely to die violently than men. I don't think that there's any culture in the world where women are more likely to experience violence than men. There is only one culture in the world, as of about 5 years ago, only one where women are more likely to commit suicide than men, and that's Afghanistan. When you look at a place like Afghanistan too, I mean, you think of the plight of women there, and it's really terrible. But then you go and you look at the situation for boys and men there, and you find that 95% of child laborers there are boys. You find that 95% of sex workers in Afghanistan are underage boys. So, and these underage boys, like we think, oh, it's horrible when girls are victimized and exploited sexually. Well, of course it is, right? But the US military fired one of their officers just last year, I believe, for, I guess the situation was that he had been listening for a few nights in a row to this high official Afghani in the government, big, powerful man, raping an 8-year-old boy for 3 nights in a row. And finally, he couldn't stand it anymore, and he went and beat the guy up. And the US military fired him for that. It interferes with diplomatic relations with the people that the US has to be able to negotiate with. And the US military, the head honchos, essentially gave standing orders to everybody to not interfere with that because it's a cultural practice. Now, would they do that if the child in question was a girl? I don't think so. So you have all kinds of situations. And you look at, oh God, what was it? The Colbert Report. On their YouTube channel, the official YouTube channel, they were doing a PSA on getting girls in developing countries back in school. And the LOBAR, the information section, said globally 58 million girls are not, of elementary school age, are not in school. Let's get girls back into the classroom. And they linked to a UNESCO report. And that UNESCO report stated that 31 million girls and 27 million boys of that age globally were not in school. So it's essentially they've taken all of these boys and given them a sex change in terms of the PR to promote this campaign. And it makes the situation look twice as bad as it is for girls, and it completely erases the fact that there is also a problem for boys. So I don't think that there's any culture in the world where at least us, we here, are looking at that culture and seeing a real picture of exactly what's going on there. Because our media is feeding us just as distorted a picture of those cultures as it feeds us of our own. So, yes?
So a coworker asked me what I was doing this weekend, and I had a tremendous amount of difficulty just telling him that, hey, I'm going to see this movie, and this is what it's about. Given that chilling effect that exists around these conversations, and frankly, a sense of like self-preservation, how can an average person sort of get engaged in some form of maybe undercover activism to help rectify these injustices?
Okay, so you're asking about, given the social stigma, and the fact that you might not want to come out publicly in support of these things, like a lot of people would prefer not to. How can ordinary people get involved? I think I'm going to hand it off to you for that.
Hello. So we here in Edmonton, we have a branch called CAFE. It's an acronym for Canadian Association for Equality. And the best example of what we've accomplished can be seen in Toronto, which is we have a center there where it's called CCFM, and it's the Center for Men and Families. And you have a lot of professional people, lawyers, psychologists, dignified people working to support people who need these services. They're largely geared towards men, but if there are women who need support, they have no problem either sending them in the right direction or giving them the support themselves. So what we're trying to do here in Edmonton is mimic that. And if you go to Calgary Center, which I recommend you check out, they have accomplished that in small form. They have once every 2 weeks a center for men and families where there's a professional registered psychologist. Men can go there and it's a sliding scale pay rate. And they can be treated with dignity and respect and not be insulted because they're men with problems. So our branch is pretty respectable. We're a registered charity. The word equality is not that ugly. And if you tell a friend you're involved in the equality movement, chances are they'll have no qualms with it. So one way you can get involved is go to Google Canadian Association for Equality. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm on the website, the Edmonton branch. And that's pretty much it. We're working to establish that and working towards more concrete goals. Even domestic violence center for men in honor of Earl Silverman. But those are long-term goals. But if you want to be a part of that, you can contact me or CAFE itself.
Also, there's a ton of work that actually, for organizations, that needs to be done behind the scenes. Clerical work and logistical work and things like that. And that's really the non-romantic and non-glamorous type of work. And nobody really likes to do it. And so if you have any talent with accounting or, just general managing of things, organizations like CAFE could probably use somebody who could volunteer to do that. You could also look into, and this is one of the issues with men's rights and men's issues organizations, is that in a lot of cases they're not these sort of umbrella organizations. Like we're not the national organization for women or something like that. A lot of them are dealing with individual issues. So if maybe you want to get involved in intactivism, you can see what's there just dealing with that issue. And you might be able to find a group that is working to end all forms of genital mutilation, not just for boys, not just for girls. The Parental Alienation Awareness Association, the Equitable Child Maintenance and Access Society, those groups primarily help men because it's primarily men who are in situations where they need that kind of help, but they also help women. And so you can volunteer for those kinds of organizations, you can promote them, you can refer your friends if they're having a hard time to organizations like that. So that's really, because we're very fragmented in terms of not cramming every men's issue under this one big umbrella of, multi-issue organizations, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can help out regarding a single issue that's maybe not going to be as frowned on as joining a men's rights group. So there's that as well. So. Oh, what? You're just intervening now?
That's right. I'm master ceremony, so I do that. Yeah, so I just wanted to reiterate something Karen said there. She mentioned the ECMAS, Equitable Child Maintenance and Access Society. That's an Edmonton-based fathers' rights group. They've been around for like 20 years. They're a group of really good volunteers, and their motto is, the best parent is both parents. So if you want to get involved, you can get in touch with them. They're at ecmas.org, and they also meet every single Tuesday at 7 o'clock at the Bonnie Doon Shopping Center on the second floor. So definitely get involved with them if you feel the urge to do something about this. So, another question? Or? Red.
All right. Basically, do you think that anti-feminism and being pro-men's rights will ever be inseparable, or will there be a point where feminism can reform itself to be inclusive of men's rights as well as women's rights?
Okay, so will feminism ever be inclusive with men's rights? Karen?
Will they ever be compatible? No. No, okay, because feminism, if you look at the etymology of the word, it was actually coined by Charles Fourier back in like the 1850s or something like that. And he essentially stated that society's moral rectitude could only be determined by the degree to which its women were liberated. Now, if you look at that, that's not about equality, because every single man in this room could be enslaved, every single woman could be like super, super free and wealthy and have, you know, a great life. And he would think that that is compatible with his feminist ideals. That would be a just society. And over the last 9 years, I have gone further and further and further back into the history, looking for that noble feminism that was only about equality, and I've never found it. I've never been able to locate it. I've been able to locate certain feminists all the way through who have held to that value and that ethic. But as a movement on the whole, I don't think that it's redeemable. I think that essentially what's going to happen is feminism will polarize to the point and kind of radicalize to the point, especially the more pressure that gets put on them, to the point where only the lunatics are willing to stay on the ship, and everybody else is just going to maybe open their eyes a little bit and become more reasonable. And they probably won't call themselves feminists anymore. But it's the worldview, right? It's that way that they have of looking at society. In sociology, there's a whole bunch of different lenses that you can use in order to assess what's going on in a society. And feminists use one single model. It is conflict theory. And all it does is it looks at political power, privilege, economic power, and oppression. Those are the only things that they look at. And that's the only things that they have looked at right from the Declaration of Sentiments onward. So 1849, 1848, I believe it was, when that was written. And it reads like a Marxist manifesto, except instead of bourgeoisie, you have men, and instead of proletariat, you have women. And that's their model, right? And that model can't be redeemed. It can't describe all of society. It can be useful in describing some things, but you can't only look through that lens. And that's the only lens they look through. That is the feminist lens. So, anybody else? In the back.
I just had a question about just the young men going to school. I think I've heard you talk about where they cater to more feminine qualities and squelch masculine qualities. And I kind of remember that going through elementary school, mainly where I was a rambunctious boy, and that's kind of frowned upon. So if you had a male child, how would you recommend, if you're not going to be there all the time, how would you recommend guiding them through that?
Okay, so how do you recommend guiding your boy through a school that's trying to crush his little spirit? Okay, I'm just going to give an example from my own life. My son, when he was in grade 3, he was about half an hour late home from school, and he comes kind of crashing in the door. He's like, "Guess what, Mom? Guess what? I got detention." And I'm like, "Okay, what did you do?" And he says, "I got into a brawl." And he was like so excited. And I'm like, "Okay, explain what happened." He says, "Well, there were these bigger kids and they were picking on one of my friends and they started pushing him around, so I just jumped in and I started swinging. And then I accidentally kicked my friend in the nuts." And I'm like, "Okay, so you probably wouldn't do that again?" He says, "I don't know, it was kind of fun." And so I'm sitting there, he pulls out this little package of stuff that he and I both have to fill out, right? And it's like, what did you do wrong? What are you going to do differently next time? And I told him, "I'm very proud of what you did. You jumped in and helped your friend, right? And I think that that's a noble thing, and I think that that's a good thing. Now here, let me help you cheat on your test. Okay, and I will tell you exactly what you have to say. Okay, what will you do next time?" And he's like, "I don't know." I said, "Go tell an adult. That's what you have to say. I'm going to go tell an adult." He says, "Am I going to do that?" I'm like, "I don't know. I don't particularly care. I'm just trying to keep you out of trouble here." Okay, so you essentially, support your kid, you let them know what the expectations are at school, you let them know that those aren't necessarily your expectations, right? And that you will back them up. They have to play along in certain ways, but you will back them up when they need it. And I think that that's probably the only thing that you can do as a parent other than maybe homeschooling. You let them know that you're not ashamed of their boy behavior. and that it's the teacher's problem, and because it's the teacher's problem, they're gonna have to, you know, chill out at school a little bit and try and behave, because the teacher is the one in charge, but you don't agree with it, and you support them, and you don't think that their little spirit needs to be crushed. So I think that's probably the best way to go. Monique.
What can we do? Like, one of the biggest obstacles to get men to see their vulnerabilities would be women's sense of victimhood, because people rush to kind of indulge that more than as an impulse. So what can we do to help women overcome that so that they can become more reasonable?
Okay, so women's sense of victimhood is what? It's like this huge black hole sucking all the compassion in, and there's none left over for anybody else, and what can we do to help women overcome that sense of victimhood is the question, paraphrased. But I don't know that even if women completely shed that we would still have, that we would have equal compassion for men. I don't think that it's possible. I do think that helping women figure out that they're powerful, helping women figure out that their choices are trade-offs, right? And you are not going to be able to be a part-time mother and part-time employee and have the same career trajectory as a man who is a full-time employee and a part-time parent, right? You're just, and that's not a bad thing. That's not necessarily an injustice, right? That's just a choice, and you can't have everything. So I think that, you know, trying to let women know that not every choice that they make that results in an unequal outcome is somehow imposed on them by the outside world, that they are actually making choices for themselves. They're making choices that make them happy in a lot of cases when they have those choices. That would really help. And I think that maybe just being honest in the conversation as far as women's choices, women's outcomes, and all of those things, right? That's about all we can do, right? Yes?
One thing I was wondering is, with the current focus on the investigations into missing Indigenous girls, what can be done to bring forward the idea that it's not just girls?
The missing and murdered Indigenous women inquiry, what can be done? Well, it's been tried. There was a major push to try to include Aboriginal men and boys in that inquiry. That was, the kibosh was put on that. And it really is a horrible thing because, you know, someone online looked into the statistics and they found that the difference in solve rates for murdered Aboriginal women and all other murdered women is like 1 or 2%. I mean, it's right up there around 90% for both groups. And for men, it's down 70, 75, something like that. And for Aboriginal men, lower than that. Right, and so if there is any group in Canada that really is having a serious problem, it's men compared to women and Aboriginal men compared to everybody else, and yet there is no political will. And in order to get that into the conversation, in order to put pressure on politicians to include them, you need to have people on the ground pushing for it. And until there's a public will, there will be no political will. Politicians will get away with whatever they want. So if they can get away with it, right? So.
Well, CAFE itself, we have access to, I believe his name is Chief Ernie Gray. His sister was part of one of the victims of Robert Pickton. I believe he was involved in the missing and murdered women inquiry, but he's been pushing for men to be included, and I'd be glad to arrange an event with him here. All I need is 2 or 3 people who want to help out. If you want to help out, just definitely. So after this talk, I'll come talk to you, exchange details, and we can pretty much get the ball rolling as far as raising awareness of that issue and keep on pushing forward.
I think actually the inaugural talk for CAFE or maybe it was Simon, well, they co-sponsored CAFE and Simon Fraser University's Advocacy for Men and Boys Society. Their inaugural event was Adam Jones, who's a UBC professor, talking about missing and murdered Aboriginal men and boys, and essentially asking why they're not part of the inquiry. So and then we get accused of being racist and not dealing with issues of race and ethnicity and other things. But anyhow, so yeah, it's a sticky problem because in order for the politicians to care, the public has to care, right? And so it's a matter of raising awareness more than anything else. And it's hard to do when CBC is our national broadcaster, and they're not going to ask me for an interview anytime soon, or anybody else who could speak on issues like this. So, yeah. One more very brief one. Yes.
I just wanted to thank everybody for putting this together, for starters, because this is awesome. I drove 4.5 hours to see this from Parental. Kind of a two-part question, actually. One part, can I buy copies of this somewhere? This video? And two, what can I do from 4.5 hours away?
Okay, so can you buy the red pill? Yes, you can buy the red pill. You can rent it on YouTube, you can rent it on iTunes, you can rent it on Google Play, Hulu, Vudu, pretty much everywhere. It's available almost everywhere movies are available online other than Netflix. And you can also go to redpillmovie.com, I believe, or theredpill.com, I forget exactly what it is. And there will be a list of where you can get it to rent or to purchase. So that's it's very, very accessible. And interestingly enough, in Australia, on YouTube, it was the #2 movie. Logan, the Wolverine movie, their most recent release, was #1, and right underneath that was the red pill during the ICMI during July this year. So it's selling. And then as far as the other one, what can you do from 4.5 hours away? Participate in conversations online as much as possible, and not just in places where these conversations are happening. Go to news articles that interest you, where you see an injustice being done or something that's biased, and comment on those, or write a letter to the editor. Make your voice heard. You don't even have to do it in your own name. Sometimes you can do it anonymously. Donate to organizations that you feel are worthwhile. Whether that's a little extra money every month, $10 a month or something, or whether that's a little bit of time. Honey Badger Radio is an organization. We operate as a business, and we have participants in Chicago and Dayton, Ohio, and Calgary and Kelvington, Saskatchewan, for crying out loud, which is essentially buttfuck nowhere, Saskatchewan. And all over the place. And so, there are things that you can do without having necessarily access to something like this. And so that's what I would suggest. So.
Thank you.
Or are we done?
That about does it for tonight. So thanks everyone coming along, and hope you enjoyed the night. And yeah, do go purchase the red pill like Karen mentioned. I think I probably should have been the one who said you can go buy it, it's available. So thanks for doing that.
Yeah, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
That's where I got my.
Somebody told me it was the #1 downloaded film 2 months ago on iTunes.
Yep.
There it is. Yeah.
If you ask me, I think it's Oscar worthy, but that's just not going to happen. We all know that.
Actually, she did get an award for it.
Oh, really?
Oh, she's gotten several awards for it. She got Best in Festival at the Idlewild Film Festival, and she got the Women in Film Award for it.
There you go.
Women in Film.
Yes.
I think we're going to use some kind of a bonus for all this information, Karen, but you're not collecting a speaking fee. I think the arrangement is Khalil has to mow your lawn for the rest of the summer. That's what they are doing. So everybody, thanks for coming, and just to remind you, we're meeting up at the End Zone Pub, which is 8604 112th Avenue. Sheila, I hope you got that, because that's got to be worth at least the first round, right?
It's essentially on the corner of Stadium Road and 111.
Yeah, just a couple blocks. We're just gonna move this one down
Thanks for
there.
all the road construction.
Yeah,
One of awesome and bomb day.
Cool.
all right.
So, have a good night.
Thank you.